Welcome to Journey Through Time. I'm David Olusoga.
And I'm Sarah Churchwell.
And last time we left Paris under siege, with Prussian troops surrounding the city in a great ring, the French government of national defense with one foot already out of the door. The people of Paris are hungry, they are angry, they are distrustful, and increasingly they are convinced that it is the capital, it is the people of Paris who are the last defenders of the French nation.
And I think this mood really can't be understated. It's a mingled sense of pride and self-respect in themselves, and then the sense that everybody else is letting them down.
The national government is on the verge of coming to terms or considering coming to terms with the Prussian invaders. But this city is saying no.
Yeah, we're going to fight on. And that creates this, obviously, right, this rising tension, rising anger. They are really suffering, as we'll see. And so the sense that something's about to snap is just growing. And it being Paris, we know what that means. There's going to be barricades. In early November, there is a citywide vote to reaffirm the government. They realize things are shaky, and so they put it to a vote. The government of national defense does carry the citywide vote, but several districts elect radicals, including the working class district of Montmartre, which is going to feature heavily in the story of the Commune. And they elect a young radical Republican named Georges Clemenceau. Now, this should be a familiar name to listeners. It is the same Clemenceau who decades later will lead France through another war against Germany.
This is the beginning of the story that takes Clemenceau to be Prime Minister of France during the First World War, when he is the person who rallies France at another kind of desperate moment, again against the German army, when it looks like the war on the Western Front is unwinnable. And Clemenceau comes back, comes to power, and reorganizes and in some ways reestablishes the French army, gives it a sense of pride again, gives it a sense of purpose and a sense of belief in itself. But it's also, and it's interesting coming to his role in the Paris Commune, because this is also the moment when Clemenceau's sense of antagonism towards Germany is born. He's famous in the First World War as being the French politician who pushes for a vengeful peace, who pushes for a peace treaty with Germany that demands reparations, that demands payments from Germany for the damage done to France. He is famous for the word revanche, revenge against Germany. Well, it is the experiences as the young Clemenceau, as the mayor of Montmartre. That's when these sentiments that are going to shape his attitudes in the First World War are born. So it's very interesting to me, who writes about the First World War, to read about Clemenceau as a young man.
And as you say, he never forgets the lessons that he learns over the next year or so. At this point, he denounces, and it's very much in keeping with your description, of course, of his politics during the First World War. Similarly here, he denounces any hint of surrender as a betrayal of the nation. That's the mood in Paris. But across the country, particularly across rural France, that is not the mood. And in those villages, the idea of peace at any price is gaining ground.
So we're seeing an increasing separation between a nation from its capital, with very different politics, very different priorities and beliefs in the countryside compared to the capital.
And that division is also going to shape the story of the Commune. Paris is under siege. All of these provincial towns and cities are not. And in Paris, the siege has been dragging on for months. From autumn into, we said last time, it's actually a very harsh winter. So from autumn into a difficult winter. And starvation is just beginning to grind the city down. Prices are, of course, skyrocketing. It's famine conditions. There's no milk for children. And their 80 days of provisions run out much faster than they hoped. So the first thing that happens is around 65,000 horses are slaughtered for food. Now that might sound like that's going to solve your problem for a while, but it's a city of almost 2 million people, and it doesn't stretch very far, in fact. When the horses are gone, you know what's next. People start eating their pets. So signs for feline and canine butchers appear on street corners. Now, you and I have both been to Paris. We've talked before about how much Parisians adore their dogs.
Yeah.
So when the journalist Henri Labouchere says he ate a spaniel and it made him feel like a cannibal, I think we can sympathize. I think I would feel like a cannibal if I ate a spaniel.
I think I'd rather starve, to be quite honest.
Oh, yeah.
Having never starved, that's an easy thing to say.
I think that's right? Because they are animal lovers, and this is what extremity drives them to. And very quickly, those skyrocketing prices apply even to domestic animals. So in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, a rabbit cost 45 francs if you could get one. Of course, you're in a fortress city. There aren't going to be a lot of rabbits running around. A cat cost 20 francs, and a dog's leg was 6 francs a pound. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, because there's an even more infamous part of this story of Paris starving.
Because the pets run out, and then they move to the zoo. So the hippopotamus was spared. The hippopotamus was too big, and it would have cost 80,000 francs by weight. So it's just too pricey. No butcher can afford to buy the hippopotamus. So the hippopotamus survives. The monkeys are also spared. They're just too human, right? But everything else is fair game. Kangaroos, antelopes, donkeys, mules, reindeer. Now, this account comes from Alistair Horne's classic account of the siege, and he goes through all of the detail from the diaries, the journals, the letters that make clear what people were actually eating at the time.
Because it's well recorded, because it is so shocking, and people doing it are shocked. It's not like just journalists from outside who are shocked by this. The people who are having to do this, who have no choice, are themselves horrified by what they've been pushed into.
Yeah, and it's like an extremely grim Noah's Ark, right? It's just this catalog of animals, but exactly, they don't want to do this, obviously. So to them, it's a measure of how far they're willing to go. They are not going to concede to the Germans. They will eat mules and reindeer and their own spaniels. They will fight the Germans. Zoo animals are sold in the butcher shops as fancy meats. They get a little euphemism. Everybody knows what fancy meat means. It means you've got a zoo animal. Butchers' windows display wolf carcasses. There are street boys selling camel kidneys. And the pride of the Paris Zoo were 2 young elephants named Castor and Pollux, and they were butchered and sold for 40 francs a pound. We were talking about the character of Paris and how it comes through here is not just their determination to survive and their absolute unwillingness to surrender, but they start treating all of this with a certain Parisian flair. And so they're not just going to survive, they're going to survive with style. And culinary fashion starts to develop around this. So wealthy diners start debating the flavor of exotic animals. Do you like reindeer better than camel? At a restaurant called Brabant, they serve camel hump, and a diner describes it as divine. And then the zoo animals run out and they resort to rats. And this is the really famous part of the siege of Paris, is that they survived on rats. And at the Jockey Club, which is this, fancy restaurant, they started serving rat pies. I think it's such a great detail. It's such a French detail that, if you're going to make me eat rat, we're going to have rat pies at our best restaurants. If there's one battlefield the French are not going to lose, it's gastronomy, right? Right. You make us eat rats, we're going to have rat pies in the finest restaurants with the finest wines.
That's the surreal part of it, is this is still the beautiful Paris that is brand new, just been built by housemen. This is people sitting in those beautiful restaurants with the glass frontages, but they're eating rats.
They're eating
rats.
So
everything else, there's wine, there's beautiful crockery and cutlery, waiters, everything you would expect, but the only thing to eat is rats.
We may think that we're bringing kind of gallows humor to bear here, but of course so were they. That was part of how they were surviving. It's a story about defiance and survival. And okay, we'll find the humor in this and we will keep going. Paris is fighting on. And if that means serving rat pies at their finest restaurants, then by God, that's what they're going to do. If Paris is fighting on, however, the very much misnamed government of national defense is not.
This is the national government, which is now outside of Paris.
And they are negotiating. They are negotiating with Bismarck from a safe distance, which of course only deepens anger in Paris. If you're surviving on rats so that you don't surrender and your government is negotiating surrender, well, you can understand where the outrage comes from. And through December and January, the siege tightens. So not only are they moving into famine conditions, but fuel and medicine are running out and freezing temperatures are gripping the city.
People are cutting down the trees and the boulevards that had been part of this great vision for this new French capital. They're just reduced to stumps because people are freezing. And because so much wood is being burnt, it's also a period when Paris is gripped by terrible pollution. You can't see. It's a winter. There's thick wood smoke everywhere. I think the contrast between how beautiful that city is and the hellish conditions of starvation and pollution and cold, it's such a strange way of imagining that city. And of course, the bullet holes of this story we're going to tell are still visible in Paris. You can go to the places and look at a photograph of what was happening at this moment and see the barricades and see the bodies on the street. So it is strangely close to us because this is a city that many people have been to.
Yeah. And, one of the reasons why the smoke gets so bad from the trees that they chop down, as you say, is because they were just planted. And so they're green. And so a lot of
them.
Full
of water.
They're full of water and they don't burn very well. So all of the conditions are there to make things worse and worse and worse for the Parisians. And yet they fight on. On the radical left, in the political clubs and among the National Guard, as you can imagine, resentment is really, really hardening and they're getting really bitter, especially in working class neighborhoods like Montmartre, La Chapelle and others.
It's probably worth saying, because Montmartre plays such a big part in this story, that, I struggle to remember when I'm in Montmartre today, which is just lovely cafes and kind of
so
shops.
touristy.
Yeah, it's such a kind of twee, lovely sort of Notting Hill of Paris. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And it's hard to remember this was a really, really poor working class neighborhood of Paris. And it was poor because it's so hilly. Posh people didn't want to live there.
So one of the reasons why there are so many tourists in Montmartre today is because they're all there visiting Sacré-Cœur, the Great White Basilica that, kind of looms over the city. But that's not built yet.
No. Montmartre is a hill with lots of poor people living on it in 1871, basically.
And is going to feature more and more in this story. So Bismarck, as we've said, has been betting that he can grind Parisians down with hunger, and they respond basically by giving him the finger and turning rats into haute cuisine, and they're not going down. So in January 1871, he's been waiting for 5 months. He finally starts bombarding the city. So on top of everything, now they have shelling. Hundreds of shells a day. Hundreds of Parisians are killed. Thousands are left homeless. And as if all of this isn't horrific enough, disease is spreading.
As it inevitably was going to under those conditions. And it is, in some ways, Paris is fortunate that disease broke out relatively late.
Yes, indeed, but it's also proving more deadly than the artillery.
Yeah.
So pneumonia is killing 1,000 Parisians a week, smallpox, typhoid, all raging. And of course, the city's weakened by famine.
Yeah, yes. People who are already hungry, who've already lost a lot of their resilience, a lot of their body weight, are so much more susceptible. And add on to that the sort of terror effect. The shelling doesn't kill that many people, but to be in a city being bombarded is to live in fear, to live in terror. There's an emotional impact as well as a physical impact. Though, shells hit a hospital. It is shocking.
And you're homeless.
Yeah.
So you may not have been killed, but where are you going to go? And you don't have any food and you don't have any shelter, and it's winter and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And yet all of this just stiffens Parisian resolve. He cannot break their spirit. But the government sees it differently. And in January 1871, the government, believing that they cannot beat Bismarck, capitulate. And Paris, of course, is outraged. Betrayed. And anybody in their situation would feel the same.
Your national government, in the midst of a siege in which you're starving, has surrendered to the Germans.
And nobody else is starving. Just Paris, and your government betrays you. Even moderate papers say the word capitulation is everywhere on the street, and radical papers say things like Paris is trembling with anger, right? And it was, of course it was. And then, as if all of that wasn't bad enough, they're told the terms.
Yeah.
Now, everyone knew Germany would take Alsace-Lorraine. That was obvious. It was what the war was fought over.
These are territories on the borders between France and Germany with a large German-speaking majority throughout most of it, where they speak a German dialect.
And it's an industrial heartland, so it's a valuable territory, and they've been fighting over it, and it goes back and forth between Germany and France.
And Bismarck's great mission is to unify the people, the German-speaking peoples. And so it is obvious, as you say.
We know that part, but then the Republican government also concedes 5 billion francs in reparations, which is an absolutely ruinous sum of money.
Yeah, which people fear will bankrupt the country, and it will also be used by Germany to build up its industry and its defenses.
Yeah. And until the debt is paid, France submits to partial occupation. So they're going to be occupied until they pay off this astronomical reparation bill. But for the Parisians, they haven't been beaten. Their feeling is that they haven't lost. They've just been starved into submission, and then their government betrays them. And for many on the left, this capitulation confirms all of their fears, that the government's bourgeois leaders have surrendered to foreign oligarchs rather than share power with their own people, that they would literally rather give power to Bismarck than to their own working class.
And this is the moment when the policies and the interests and the stamina of the people of Paris completely separates from the government outside of Paris. And these are the conditions that's going to lead to something quite radical, quite remarkable, which is a new form of government emerging in the city of Paris. This is the moment of birth of what we call the Paris Commune. Let's tell that story after a break. Welcome back. We are in Paris. It is January 1871. The French government has just surrendered. It surrendered to the German Empire, a country that has literally just been formed. The German states, unified under Prussian leadership, have created the German Empire, and they have announced the birth of their new nation in France, in the Palace of Versailles, in the famous Hall of Mirrors. And at this moment, the Prussian king, Wilhelm I, becomes the first German emperor, the first Kaiser. For the Germans, this is a moment of national destiny. For France, its armies defeated, its capital still besieged, it is a moment of national despair.
It is absolutely rubbing salt in the wounds. And this is something that Prussia is going to proceed to do over the course of the next few months. They don't have to announce the birth of the German Empire at Versailles, but that's what they decide that they're going to do.
Yeah, the story of humiliation and national honor and national pride really runs through this story. And of course, it is creating precedents and it is building up enmities that are going to rumble on well into the 20th century. This is this first in a series of events that really is going to go all the way through to 1945.
Yeah. So in France, what this means is that the peace terms in January trigger national elections. Most votes come from rural areas. Obviously, Paris doesn't dominate the country. And those areas are untouched by siege. They are dominated by monarchists and Catholic conservatives, and they are supporting peace at any price, which is exactly what Paris doesn't want. But a conservative victory affirms an assembly that is going to deliver the peace. So the divide between this increasingly radicalized, furious, starving Paris and a cautious conservative government and the rural areas that it represents is just deepening and deepening. On January 22nd, so 4 days after the declaration of the German Empire, crowds gather outside the Hôtel de Ville,
the City Hall of Paris.
The City Hall of Paris, to protest the rumors of surrender and a smaller, angrier replay of October's failed uprising, which we talked about last time, happens again. But this time, the protest turns deadly because the government troops open fire on the crowds. Now, among the insurgents is the schoolteacher Louise Michel, who we met last time, the Red Virgin. She's dressed in a guardsman uniform, and it's actually on this day that she earns the nickname, the Red Virgin, because she's firing back at the government troops from behind an overturned omnibus, and people start to tell stories about her, and this is when she gets this nickname. Now, the revolt is brief, it's poorly organized, but the government shooting back into a Parisian crowd changes everything. And overnight, Paris splits, basically. So the radicals are accusing the government of murdering patriots, the people who've been starving to keep Prussia out, and moderates are vowing to restore order because the city is erupting in violence and chaos. So authorities shut down the city's leftist clubs. It charges leading agitators. But one of the few concessions in the armistice that follows comes out of this, which is that Paris guardsmen are allowed to keep their weapons. And this decision will come to haunt the Republic. On February 17th, after the national elections, the assembly picks their leader, and it's a man named Adolphe Thiers. He's clever, he's cautious, and he's really quite loathed in Paris.
He's been around a long time. He's in his early 70s by this point.
Yeah, they know who he is, and they don't like him. 2 days earlier, the Paris Guardsmen united under a single command, and they reject the surrender. So the guardsmen are armed. There's 300,000 of them, and they say they're not accepting the terms. Now, during the war itself, the Paris guardsmen were, this kind of loose militia of working class reservists, and they were fairly disinterested in fighting for national defense. They came up for a lot of criticism in Paris because they weren't really fighting hard enough. They were more interested in drinking, according to their critics. But they are interested in defending Paris. And thanks to the armistice, they are armed, they're organized, they're independent. As we've said, they're overwhelmingly working class, and they are now mightily pissed off. And that's enough to make the national government extremely nervous, especially after these several uprisings.
And by now, the national government is in the Palace of Versailles outside of Paris. They'd been moving around the country while the siege of Paris was ongoing. They're now settled in Versailles. And there's going to be this division between the Commune and the government in Versailles.
Yeah. And now increasingly, it is a direct conflict of Paris versus Versailles. And that's how the story will unfold. So Thiers' government moves quickly to reassert control over Paris. They know the guardsmen are armed, they're independent, and they're angry. So he cuts their pay, he shuts down their clubs, and he says this is about fiscal discipline. But everybody knows it's about fear. Everybody knows that it is a reassertion of national authority over the local guardsmen. And so political clubs spring back up again across the guards' districts, and they're kind of mixing all of this anger that they're feeling in the moment with these old Republican ideals, with socialist theories, and with memories of all of the failed revolutions of the 1830s and 1848. And the city just starts buzzing, right, with just revenge, the revolution they still want, the sense of betrayal. We were saying that when the Germans proclaimed the existence of the German Empire, they were rubbing salt in the wounds of France by doing it in Versailles. But they decide to rub salt in Paris's wounds again. And the peace treaty allows the Prussians to parade German troops down the Champs-Élysées. Which is, again, a deep insult to Parisians who wanted to go down fighting. And the German troops are being allowed to parade down their Grand Boulevard.
Parade to a city that they actually hadn't conquered.
They had not conquered.
The French government had surrendered. Paris had not been conquered. The siege had not worked. The Parisians had held out, and yet they still have to endure the humiliation of a victory parade by an army that had not been victorious in Paris.
It's so easy to understand how angry they were. I think it's not easy to put ourselves in that position because we can't understand, as you say, neither one of us has starved. We can't understand the extremity that they were feeling. But even just the description of it starts to make your blood boil. And then you imagine if you'd actually been eating your family pets, if you'd actually been watching, your friends and family die of disease, if you'd actually been watching the houses bombed all around you, and then
your children turn into like walking skeletons, and then the enemy army parades in victory down the streets.
And that is going to shape how events unfold. That rage is very real, and it drives what happens next. So by early March, the National Assembly, as we've said, has settled at Versailles. And that also, of course, makes official the fact that it's abandoned Paris. So Paris is also like, well, the government has just, and we said earlier, is kind of pissed off and left us. And a few days after the National Assembly officially settles itself at Versailles, the Paris Guard, which has a central committee, an organizing committee, takes over the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall. So basically, we have a citizen army in Paris that is now occupying the government's buildings. Outside the city, Prussian troops are still holding the ring. And we need to remember that although the government has capitulated, the Prussians are still circling Paris. And of course, they are permitted a partial occupation of France, thanks to the terms of the peace. Anyway, Prussia is outside the city, and the forces of Versailles and Paris are coming closer and closer to open conflict within the city. For Thiers and his government, the idea of a Paris with its own armed forces, its own, militant army, is not just that it's unruly. I mean, this is a complete existential threat to their authority. As a national government, you can't have a kind of separate militant armed force that is occupying your capital city. So they decide that what they need to do is to take Paris's artillery.
To take it away from the National Guards who are now trying to rule Paris.
In particular, what this means is the cannons. So during the siege, Parisians had clubbed together and they bought cannons to defend themselves with public subscription. And in many cases, this is working class people donating money they could ill afford to come to the defense of the city. And they're incredibly proud of their cannons. They've become kind of sacrosanct. They're symbols of their resistance and of their unwillingness to concede. And over the course of this kind of rising tension with the national government, they have removed the cannons to Montmartre. They are now at the top of Montmartre where they can protect them.
It's the highest point in Paris. It is the logical place where you would put artillery.
And as you say, it wasn't that populous at the time as well. So they've got 170 cannons. They need somewhere to put them. Montmartre is an obvious place to do it.
And there's empty space up there. You can build emplacements for them. You can build fortifications to put them in.
Now, all through the siege, women have remained at the heart of the city's politics. The journalist André Leo, who we met before, the one who took her pen name from her twin sons, she's now writing that the national government is turning loyal defenders into enemies. And her colleague Anna Jacquelart is also there. She's organizing and arguing. They're holding the movement together. Louise Michel, known as the Red Virgin of Montmartre, is teaching. She's speaking at guard assemblies. She's rallying. And these women are really part of a new international generation. They are radicals who see the fight for Paris not just as a fight for women's rights in Paris or even in France, but as part of a global struggle for equality. And by March, these networks of women's clubs are working really closely with the Paris Guardsmen. They are political, they're militant, they're ready, they're colleagues, and they're working side by side. And then TA decides to come for their cannons. So on March 18th, 1871, this is the moment when it all begins. At dawn, 2 brigades of government troops climb. Anyone who's climbed it knows how steep the hill to Montmartre is. They climb that steep hill to seize the 170 cannons. And local women, the working class women of Montmartre, are among the first to respond. Now, as it happens, Louise Michel is already there. She's delivering a message to the guardsmen who are protecting the cannon. And when the national troops arrive and try to disarm them, a guardsman is shot and he's fatally wounded. So Michel is nursing him as Paris awakes and they start ringing the alarm bells. And so people rush to Montmartre as the news spreads. Michel grabs her rifle. She's always armed. She's a nurse with a gun. I have a lot of time for Louise Michel. She is shouting treason, according to her own memoirs. She says she grabs her rifle, shouting treason, and runs to defend the cannons. And the women of Paris gather. It's housewives with their children. And they hold their ground next to the guardsmen. They're defending the cannons. And they're telling the national soldiers, you will not fire upon the people. That's what they keep saying. You will not fire upon your brothers and sisters. You will not fire upon these children. And their defiance, which kind of confuses the national troops. What are they supposed to do now? And it buys just enough time for reinforcements to arrive. And at this point, this botched raid to try to seize the cannons turns into a full-blown uprising. The troops are stuck on a steep hill. They're surrounded by furious Parisians. And crucially, many of the soldiers who are in the regular forces, the national forces,
the men who've been sent to Montmartre,
they are themselves conscripts from Paris and its environs. So they are not soldiers from rural France. They're locals. These are their friends and relatives. They don't want to shoot Parisians. So the tension really reaches its peak, and a Versailles general orders his men to fire. There's a moment where everybody wonders what will happen, and the regulars refuse. They're not going to shoot their neighbors. They drop their rifles, and the guardsmen arrest the general who gave the orders instead. Everything has been turned upside down, and by afternoon, Montmartre is in rebel hands. So in fact, that general and another government general are captured, and the mobs kill them. They are executed on the spot. And that violence shatters any chance of reconciliation. So by nightfall, the rest of the government, some of which had still been in Paris, has withdrawn to Versailles, and it has left Paris in the hands of these insurgents. And it's at this moment that the Paris Commune is born.
And that story of the society that very briefly the Commune brings into existence in its short radical life is the story that we'll be telling in the next episode. So please join us for the next episode of Journey Through Time.
See you then.
Thanks for listening.